Okay, so today I'm joined by Joelle Anderson, who I'm delighted to be having a chat with, all the way from Canada. So hi, Joelle.
Hi.
Hi there. Um, can we start off? Can you just sort of explain a little bit about what you do? You teach mindfulness, and but not just that. Would that be right?
Yeah, so I teach mindfulness meditation to individuals and groups. And I try to do it both face to face for those that are interested in it and online just to get more access to more people who are really curious to learn. And then on top of it, I manage and run a little YouTube channel called Kernel of Wisdom where I put up a free video every week with information about mindfulness concepts or a free guided meditation or tips on specific things like posture or things like that.
Mm.
And so between all of those different activities, essentially what I'm trying to do is just help people learn to like love themselves through the practice of mindfulness meditation, learn how to like get in touch with their emotions, appreciate those emotions, regulate those emotions, and just be with themselves no matter what the context.
Fantastic. Can I take you back a little bit to when you were growing up, and ask you a
Mhm.
little bit about your background and how life was for you growing up?
Sure.
Yeah, so you're from Canada, and
I am from Canada. Yeah.
yeah, what do you think were the experiences or the parts of your personality that led you towards this kind of thing?
Oh my gosh, that's a really good question. And I don't know that I've traced it that far back before, but I think a lot of things. I think I was always a really sensitive kid. Which means you end up with like a lot of emotional ups and downs. And I think I think understanding what the role of emotions play in our lives is a relatively new thing, at least in the West. Um, and I think I kind of grew up with a bit of a feeling like emotions are scary and you don't know what to do with them, so just try and avoid them. And I think that's super common, at least in Canada. I don't know if we're just a very passive group that's like, oh, nope, don't go there. But it's definitely a feeling that I was never necessarily taught, but I remember being prevalent. And so being sensitive, and also I was a bit of like a nerdy kid, an awkward kid. I was like severely bullied as a kid as a result.
Wow.
Um, and all of this just brought up so much feeling that by the time I was kind of at the end of elementary school, those early education years, I was quite lonely, very uh, upset, and frankly contemplating things like suicide, and just trying to find a way out from all the pain. And then eventually, it just kind of brought me to a breaking point. And I think slowly yet surely, I had to try and find ways to kind of deal with the suffering that comes up in life. And later on, like kind of closer to the end of high school, early university, some friends of mine started recommending that I look into Buddhism. And there's so much about pain and suffering and how our thoughts play into that in Buddhism that it really gave me the philosophical grounding, the ideology that helped me relate to my feelings differently. And then mindfulness is the active practice of that.
So,
And so I think that's what led me there.
how did you when you say your friends kind of recommended it? How did that kind of manifest? What did you do when they recommended it?
Yeah. So, I mean, so I went to a school, a Catholic school when I was in high school. We had like this world religions course. So, kind of my first exposure to it was through religions and kind of learning about Buddhism as an idea and Hinduism and kind of were more Eastern philosophies. And they were so different from the traditions and faiths that I had known growing up that I was super intrigued. And then we did like a field trip to a temple and stuff like that. So I started looking into it a little bit through like um, books or just through like my textbook, talking to my teacher, like trying to understand what I could. And then in university, some friends kind of told me I should read some of the books by the Dalai Lama. And so I did. And I think the first one I read was The Art of Happiness or something like that. So um, I started reading more of the Dalai Lama's books, and he talks so much about the difference between pain and suffering and where suffering comes from. And so much of that was based in what to do about emotional pain. That was kind of where I started, and then from there started just looking for meditation classes. And I grew up outside of the big city that I'm near, which is Toronto, so I wasn't in the city, so there wasn't a lot. It was actually really hard to find, even at that time, like yoga classes. And so I did find the odd one, but it was difficult to find really quality information until probably the last 5 years, when some like I started upon finding more mindfulness courses in the mainstream. So the University of Toronto offered it, and eventually I started taking courses at the University of Toronto in mindfulness, and that's what super transformed my ability. Because before that, honestly, I ended up just like in books reading about philosophy and how you're supposed to meditate and guessing. And it went okay, but it wasn't ideal. Oh, and then a friend also would lend me a bunch of lectures by Alan Watts. And Alan Watts's work I found really helpful in terms of like wrapping my head, the Western mind, especially around Eastern philosophy, and then also some tips and tricks around meditation. But a lot of it was very Zen style in terms of what he references. And so again, it was difficult to, the practice itself had been difficult for a long time.
Um, it sounds then like you firstly came through Buddhism, and
Mhm.
Alan Watts, I suppose you would say, is kind of more, yeah, more Zen and a bit rock and roll, in fact, even really. Um,
Yeah.
uh, so, how did you go from there specifically to mindfulness? Was that an accident, or did the secular aspect of mindfulness attract you, or was that not relevant at all? Or
No, it was relevant, absolutely. I think you started to hear more about mindfulness in mainstream culture and at yoga classes. So I started taking yoga, um, and it usually was like in a fitness studio type capacity. But the odd teachers started to like drop these like ideas of what mindfulness is. And because I had that grounding in reading a lot of the Buddhist philosophy and learning a lot from that um, lifestyle, I'll call it. Um, it really struck a chord. And so I paid attention to that word probably as a first step. And then I started working for Outward Bound. Now, Outward Bound is a nonprofit organization that also has for profit like trips, but they are journeys of self discovery kind of in the outdoors that are meant to kind of show you what you're capable of at every level. So, not just like physical capability, but what your emotional blocks might be or cognitive ones, like where are you limiting yourself, both in your thinking, emotion, physical sense. And they offered a mindfulness course, a mindfulness in the mindfulness in the mountains course.
all right.
So I did that, and that included a 24-hour solo. So Outward Bound courses usually have a solo, and the one I went on was luckily not too long. 24 hours is actually one of the shorter solos. And so it was 24 hours of fasting, and because it was mindfulness based, we were encouraged to meditate. And I had been off and on with meditation, mostly because I was so frustrated with not really knowing what I was doing, which is so often what stops us, which is too bad. But um, I just sat with it, and it had to be, you're not allowed to bring any books, you literally are just sent into the wilderness for 24 hours with nothing but like a whistle. I had a lighter and a tarp to sleep under, and that's it. So it was 24 hours of really having to be with myself. And eventually you get so sick of your thoughts that you just dig in and do it. And that was where I really first understood the power of that style of meditation, of being mindfully aware and present with myself. And so I just wanted more. And that's what inspired me to kind of look into mindfulness training and certificates. And I came upon the Centre for Mindfulness Studies here in Toronto and the University of Toronto. They're like amazing work that they're doing with mindfulness and teaching mindfulness as certificate programs. And it kind of all flourished from there.
So it sounds like it's quite established in Canada. Would that be a fair thing to say? Mindfulness, that is.
Uh, I would say it is. And Toronto is a particularly connected hub for mindfulness. And there's some amazing faculty at the University of Toronto in particular, in the Centre of Mindfulness Studies, who are working with some of the big names like John Kabat-Zinn or Dan Siegel and people like that in the US. I mean, Dan Siegel comes up and teaches some of the Centre for Mindfulness Studies courses. So Toronto in particular has a very strong mindfulness community, and a lot of resources in terms of like learning about mindfulness if you really want to get into it in some depth.
Mm. I'm quite interested that you said you kind of started off with books, but I got the impression from what you were saying that books didn't really kind of deliver the whole package that you needed to feel good about everything. Is that a fair comment?
Yes, I'd say especially the books that I was reading at the time.
Right. So, I mean, the reason I ask that is because I would imagine there'd be people watching this who have perhaps read about mindfulness in books and so on, and are perhaps wondering if they're, you know, if books are enough. Would you say it's possible to get everything you need from books?
I think it depends on the person. Um, my first inclination is to say no. Now, I would guess that there'd probably be the odd person who's very good at immersing themselves in books, really understanding the core of what the author is trying to convey, and finding their own way of taking that understanding and adapting it for themselves. Because the reality is, I mean, the same goes with guided meditations. I think they are imperfect in so many ways in that they're not customized. The author is putting out to the best of their ability the most holistic explanation that they can, but there's going to be nuances. There's going to be things that come up for the individual person. And if you are the type that is going to struggle with how to apply the general concept to those nuanced experiences, um, even the odd time, then the books are not going to be enough on their own. Now, I would say it's very rare that someone is able to do that in every context, which is why I'm inclined to say no. I don't think books are enough. I don't think it necessarily needs to mean that everybody jumps into lessons or spending a bunch of money on things. But I think if you look into books and then maybe look into some resources on YouTube or apps that help teach mindfulness and start to piece together from a variety of perspectives and resources what this really means, you're setting yourself up for more success. If you can meditate with a group, there's so much power to meditating with a group, even for experienced meditators. Like I think it's such a different experience meditating with other people and hearing what they're taking from it, and that sharing, that debriefing process that comes out of it. I think huge leaps can be taken by just meditating with other people. So even if you start a group or join a group that does that, amazing. I don't think mindfulness is something that needs to cost people a lot in order to do, but I think limiting yourself to just learning it in one specific way could potentially limit your practice, especially because mindfulness is an experiential activity and you're going to learn the most by actually immersing in it and experiencing it, which to me generally means finding a bunch of different ways in.
It's interesting. I tend to meditate on my own, I suppose, but when I've meditated with other people, I don't find it a particularly different experience to meditating on my own because the minute my eyes are closed, which they usually are in meditation, I'm kind of gone, if that makes sense. So,
Yeah.
are you kind of specifically referring to talking to people before and afterwards, as opposed to the experience of meditating in amongst other people?
Both. So I do most of my meditating on my own too. It's a deeply personal experience in so many ways, but it's also a deeply connected experience. I think a lot of people who meditate for some time, you meditation, especially mindfulness style meditation, I'll speak to more specifically because it's the one I'm most familiar with, really cultivates a lot of a sense of oneness, of connection with the bigger picture, with other people, with realizing that there's more than just you and your experience. along with you in your experience. So the two don't necessarily need to compete, but there's an awareness that both exist. Um, so I have found that yes, you're in a group, you close your eyes. It's a personal experience in so many ways, but you could potentially also use that experience to extend your awareness, to see if you can sense or feel the sense of connection or awareness of the presence of other people in the room, even with your eyes closed. Like if you can shift and direct your attention to that awareness, or even the subtle things that come up when you are in group. Things come up for people like just even the simple like experience where people might be like, I wonder if everybody else has their eyes closed, and you take a peek for a second. Just like
Yeah.
being in a group, like that's not a thought you would have if you're just sitting by yourself in the room. And sometimes the awareness of being one amongst others, of the potential of being seen, the potential that you might even have to share after the experience, gets you thinking and reflecting on yourself, or aware of yourself in a different way, because you're aware of how you are, not just as an individual, but an individual within community. So I think there's just different things that come up when you meditate within a group. And sometimes that can come from just even debriefing it with people on things like Reddit or through these types of conversations. Like it doesn't have to be that you're sitting and doing the meditation in the group specifically either, but that there's some sharing of our experiences that I think meditators often want to do, because such a beauty to what we learn about ourselves in the practice, but it's even more powerful when we apply it to our lives. And the reality is our lives generally involve other people, even if it's just other people serving us coffee at the coffee shop or that we run into at the bookstore, whatever. Life involves other people.
Regarding other people, I was quite interested on your website where you say, for a long time I put all my energy into gaining approval from other people and hid the sides of myself people didn't always like. And you talk about being nice and essentially, yeah, trying to sort of please other people, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
What's the relationship between mindfulness and you getting over that?
Yeah, I think for me, that tendency came from an idea that there was something wrong with me. And I think whether it's some in like concept that exists in our culture of original sin, or whether it's just part of the human experience to like self-doubt or question whether we're good enough. I think that's I've found that's a very human, almost universal experience of, am I good enough? Is there something wrong with me? And my way of coping with that doubt, and I think there's different degrees to which people feel that as well. I felt it quite strongly, probably a lot due to my personal context as a kid and the degree of bullying and experiences that I had. Um, I I really believed there was something wrong, that I wasn't okay. And so I think that looking outside for approval and being nice was please, please, other people tell me I'm okay. And what mindfulness meditation has given me was enough reflection, enough self compassion that now, although there's always moments of doubt for sure, I don't know that maybe that will go away one day, but again, it's very human to have those moments of doubt. Um, I know I'm okay. I know all of that questioning, that there's something wrong with me, is perception, not reality. And that when I can get in touch with the real me, the me that observes all those doubts, the me that observes my experiences, my thoughts, what other people are saying, my relationships, the deepest sense of me, it's completely okay. It is peace, it's at peace. And meditation allowed me to actually connect with that side of self. So I'm less swayed by a need for external approval to say I'm okay. And I have a more deep, steady sense that I am okay.
Yeah, yeah. It sounds like you're kind of talking about self-compassion and loving kindness as a way of getting over it. Would you think that's a fair comment?
I absolutely would, but I actually also think that just a connection, a, a relationship with that deep inner self on its own is enough to produce some of that. I really believe each of us is fully perfect and beautiful the way that we are inside. And it's all the other experiential stuff kind of around that core of who we are that can muddy and make all these like challenging experiences for us. So I think if we can get to that core, if each of us had the ability to do that and connect with that and believe in that, we would all know we're okay.
Mm, mm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um,
Mm-hmm.
can I take you back to when you said you went to college and studied this? Um, I've no experience of anything like that at all, so I'm quite interested in what happens. What do they teach you at college exactly?
Yeah, so I'll clarify. They were like university level certificates. So it wasn't like I did a bachelor's degree in mindfulness per se, although I am doing my master's in counseling psychology right now, and mindfulness is such a huge part of where the psychology world is going. I've heard you can do um, degrees or graduate degrees in mindfulness specifically now. So I think there's totally potential for that, and it's amazing. But what I did was certificate training programs through the University of Toronto and the Centre for Mindfulness Studies. And the way that they've modeled it is with a few things. So there was like kind of three different levels of the program. So level A was the foundations of mindfulness, and that was more of the theory, the background. So we had like a class in their neuroscience, and there was like an actual neuroscientist who came in and explained the way that the brain works and that neuroplasticity works and how mindfulness research is being shown to like affect neuroplasticity and would actually go into the changes you can make in your brain and the benefits of that based on mindfulness, for example. Or there'd be like things like psychology east meets west, and so we'd learn a bit about how like the Western history of psychology and philosophy and how that came together, and then the Eastern one and how different they are, and how those two are coming together, and some of the tensions and flourishing that's going on because those two worlds are starting to come together and collide, if you will. So a lot of it was foundational, kind of philosophical, theoretical conversations like that. Level B was more applied mindfulness. And so you take a series of different classes on different ways into mindfulness. So for example, I did one great course with a woman named a psychologist in Toronto named Dr. Sherry Geller on rhythm and mindfulness. So like actually bringing in percussion instruments, drumming, like tapping in, being mindful about how we express ourselves, being mindful about how we connect with even our breath, and that there's a rhythm to that, like finding kind of the rhythm in mindfulness and being mindful about natural rhythm that exists within our bodies, within our minds, within the world. So that was one example. I did like a mindful leadership one. Another great professional named Maria Gonzalez, who's a great book called Mindful Leadership for anyone who's in the business world, talking more about like mindful, like how to be a mindful leader, what that means, what it means, like what the concept of leadership means from a mindfulness perspective, how to be internally aware as a leader, externally aware as a leader, things like mindful speaking, mindful listening, all kind of came out of that. So there was different approaches, different ways into it, and or even courses on like letting go, and like literally how do you practice meditations for letting go. So you could select different um, types of different themes, and then you would learn a different series of meditations and practices and approaches in terms of how to use mindfulness applied to that theme. And then the last level is the kind of really transformative pieces. And so for me, there's a variety of options that they teach under that, including transformative mindfulness, but they also do the mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. And so I've continued that with the Center for Mindfulness Studies. And as someone who's studying as a psychotherapist and counselor, that's been super helpful because it really looks at um, the process between our cognitions, emotions, some of these mental health things that come up, and then how to use mindfulness within that context. Um, and like for anybody who's into psychology or mental health or even wants to self heal, there's so much coming. I'm so blown away about like with the psychology field and just how much is coming up about mindfulness and the significance of it and the power it has to heal at a very deep sustainable level, and it's amazing. So there's so much to learn there.
Yeah, I think we're in very exciting times in that respect. I think I ideally hope anyway that we're on the verge of a sort of tipping point. What's that? A critical mass. That's what I'm kind of
Totally.
hoping. I couldn't help.
Well, what I was going to say, one more thing
No,
is
go
like
ahead. Yeah, yeah.
one thing that University of Toronto I know is doing, as well as the University of or McMaster University in Hamilton here near Toronto as well, is they're really bringing mindfulness into a lot of the medical schools too. So teaching it to doctors and nurses so that it's not only being applied in the mental health fields, but in the actual like physical health fields. Even if whether that's nursing or doctor self-care, or that's how that they're approaching and listening to their patients and thinking about their patients' whole health.
Yes, yeah. I think there's that quite a bit going on about that. I was talking to Elisha Goldstein in California, and he was saying very, very similar thing about what's going on in America. I couldn't help noticing what kind of leapt out at me in the middle of all that stuff that you were saying was mindful drumming. What on earth is mindful drumming?
It's really cool. I'm so glad you asked about it because I actually had been a drummer for a large part of my life, which is why I took it, and it's amazing. So you use percussion instruments or any instrument really, like mindful sound. But what's beautiful about percussion is you don't need to worry about tones. You're not looking for like a melody. It doesn't need to sound like a song. You can just play. Especially with things like hand drums or even like shakers or rattles or anything that can make like a rhythmic noise. And what we looked at was this idea that like the breath, like within you, there's a natural rhythm. What is the rhythm of your feelings? Like if you were to take that feeling and expression, convert it into an expression that's rhythmic or musical or communicative in some way, eliminate language. Like don't worry about the language and just show what it feels. Tune in to what it feels. And then with that, to be able to take, let's say, a feeling, like if I was going to say, what did the morning feel like to me? And put that into a drum, into a rhythm. I'm not thinking about how to communicate, how to articulate that with words. And the challenge with words are beautiful and powerful and amazing, but they're limited. They limit our ability to express based on the vocabulary that we have.
Hmm.
And with a drum, what you can do is eliminate that thought process, that cognitive mediation that needs to happen between the feeling and our ability to express, and almost tap into it directly. It requires you to become very present, very aware of what you are feeling. What did the morning feel like? What do I feel like right now? And try to find a way to show that embodies some movement, some sound. It might be very aggressive, hard drumming if you've had like a really like difficult, like frustrating morning. Maybe you have like little tapping, like nice little pixie drumming because it's been a lovely little morning. Like, I mean, it sounds it's hard to describe, but it's such a powerful experience because for so many of us, it's really hard to articulate how we feel. And this allows almost like a more direct channel, a more direct line. When you look at the brain, for example, language is held in a different part than when we become aware of kind of our feelings.
Yes,
And
yes.
it's a very left brain activity, which is associated more with logic and thinking and all these things, which are great, but we also tend to over exercise in our society. So the drumming keeps us right brain. It starts to like balance that out. It allows us a form of expression that doesn't require us to go into logic thinking, some of the things that people kind of get really hung up in, and gives us a different path.
So you're
So
drumming on your own then, presumably.
Or in a group. It's actually really cool in a group because you can hear the contrast. Now or even just so many things come up, right? Group is such an interesting experience. So you might be in a group, you might find yourself getting frustrated that all the sounds sound chaotic and colliding. But that's life. Like when we go onto the the bus and we feel that same chaos because all the stuff is going on, finding the peace, the ability to tune in, tap into ourselves, to our own rhythm, to what's going on with us amongst that is equally powerful. It's just a different experience.
Okay, so you mentioned the rhythm of your thoughts.
Mm.
Can you expand on that a little bit?
I mean, I don't know about you, but I know different days, different hours, different minutes, my thoughts probably have very different rhythms. So, like, I might be home from work, let's say, and I'm starting to like think about all the stuff I need to do to get ready for the next day. The rhythm of my thoughts at that point is probably quite fast. I'm a worrier. Like it comes like fast and heavy, and I'd be like, oh my gosh, thought. Um, Sometimes, if let's say I've just had a nice bath, I'm feeling relaxed. Let's say I've just finished some mindfulness. Maybe my thoughts are a bit slower. Maybe they're a bit more easy to manage. Maybe there's like a theme or a pace to them. Um,
Okay, yeah, yeah.
yeah, there's like a
So
different
you're talking about
vibe.
the rhythm between your thoughts then, or the rhythm at which your thoughts occur, as opposed to the rhythm within the thought, if that makes
A
sense.
bit of both because there's also like the content of the thought might dictate the pace, but there's a different energy to different thoughts. There's a very different energy, I would say, between a worried thought, even if it's coming at the same pace as like a very positive, self-compassionate thought. And to me, that tone dictates. And that's what's cool about drumming is there's different hardness that you'd hit it as well as pace that you hit it. There's like a you can get into those different like tones, depths, um, like even forcefulness of it, as well as like the pace at which it comes, all that kind of thing.
Oh, that's interesting. Another thing you mentioned was cognitive behaviour therapy, and I don't know about Canada, but in the UK, certainly the main course, almost to the exclusion of others, is very much something that incorporates cognitive behaviour um, practices or techniques. How do you see the connection between that and mindfulness? Because that seems, unless I'm mistaken, that seems to me very much something that's emerged in the West rather than something that's come from the East. Would that,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, cognitive behavioral therapy in its own right. I'm sure they use it in the East. Um, it came from a Western psychologist, and it has a very Western kind of like evidence-based, linear kind of like these are the steps, this is the process type of approach to it. Even the tone of my voice changes when I talk about it. I do like, and
Yeah, yeah.
there's so much value to cognitive behavioral therapy, so I don't want to oversimplify it, but for the sake of trying to explain it, like what cognitive behavioral therapy is trying to do is get you to look at the relationship that you have to your thoughts and between your thoughts, behaviors, emotions. What cognitive behavior, and then ultimately try and look at kind of those more subconscious schemas, core beliefs, intermediate beliefs, like some of those more subtle, less easily accessible, deep beliefs about the world and ourselves and others that are underneath all of that. And so it can be, especially when it's done well, and it's often not done well, but it's often done well as well. It really depends on the person who's applying it. But when it's done well, so powerful to know that stuff. I mean, isn't that what we're trying? Well, what we often find in mindfulness is starting to notice our thoughts, notice the metacognitions we tend to have, notice the types of judgments that tend to come up for us, start to notice patterns in our thinking, in how we relate to certain thoughts, certain emotions, certain people. We start to really notice what's going on within. And so I think they work so well together because what cognitive behavioral therapy really gives us is a kind of framework for what we're looking for. It gives us the framework of like we're identifying thoughts, emotions, behaviors, and there's some understanding that there's a relationship between those things that's foundational to what's there. And that those thoughts that we see kind of day to day relate to kind of deeper beliefs, deeper understandings, deeper perspectives, lens, filters, experiencings of the world that inform them. What mindfulness does is gives cognitive behavioral therapy a great way to notice. It gives us the how to notice that stuff. And not only the how to notice that stuff, how to notice that stuff without beating ourselves up about it, without becoming really negative about ourselves because of it, to notice that stuff with the non-judgment, the kindness, the self-compassion, the outward compassion, those types of like attitudinal things that are so central to mindfulness. So at their core, I find they're very similar processes that really support each other, in that mindfulness is very experiential. So we don't always, a lot of people go in without like a framework of knowing exactly kind of what they're looking at or looking for, how to organize some of the information that comes up. Cognitive behavioral can give you that in a way that's going to help, especially if you have tendencies that aren't serving you very well. And then mindfulness kind of gives you the how to recognize so that you're not dependent on like kind of charts and thought records and all that stuff all the time, so that you can become more aware of what those insights mean for you in your day-to-day life, day-to-day context and interactions.
Um, do you use that then in when you see people, when you teach people?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I tend to be a bit eclectic when I am working with people in a counseling context, in the sense that like I'll bring in quite a bit of mindfulness, especially if they're open to it. I'll term it mindfulness. Sometimes I'm giving them mindfulness techniques or insights and like activities and not calling it mindfulness, and they're doing it, and that sneaky sacred may get in there and they may keep it get into it later. That's fine too. But I also use cognitive behavioral techniques to help people organize some of their understandings and information. And I find they have worked really well. Like when people can really, again, that name it to tame it thing, sometimes saying like, this is a core belief, this is what that means, and this is how this relates to some of your automatic thoughts, all that kind of stuff. Like cognitive behavioral therapy has given me a lot of language to help people understand and again organize some of the information that comes up. Sometimes thought records are very helpful for people, and I'll use that too. Sometimes mindfulness-based thought records. So there's like mindfulness-based cognitive therapy will use kind of an experience record that not only looks at kind of thoughts, emotions, behaviors, but also incorporates body sensations, get people feeling into their body, gets people kind of like asking, was like, were you aware of what was going on at the time? Is this based on reflection? That like starts to ask some of those mindfulness based questions, which is really helpful. But then sometimes like psychodynamic stuff, I'll pull in like asking people to like think back to their childhoods, like where does this come from? Like Adlerian things about like what purpose does this emotion serve for you? Like what has it served for you in the past? Like why is it hard to let go of even negative things? Like why do people put themselves down? What is the role of negative self-talk? Why do you do that? And it's like often that people have had a critical parent and that they learned to put themselves down and to anticipate the criticisms they were going to receive so that they could be better before the criticisms occurred from the parent or the teacher or from whoever. And then they've just developed a habit of being quite self-critical as a means of protecting themselves. And so it's super scary to let it go, because then that protection is not there. And getting people to see that, to understand where these patterns come from, to like look through all these different tools we have and processes that like, what is the full, like what do we need to accept here? What is the full reality? Not just the present reality, absolutely, but what is informing that present reality that's coming up that might be a bit more subconscious? All of that comes into it.
Wow. Okay. What's your personal practice? What do you do as a sort of? Do you have a specific structure to what you do as a personal practice?
I have structured parts and unstructured parts. So try to meditate 30 minutes a day, every day, that kind of thing. It's like a seated practice. I tend to do it sitting down in a chair. And what I'll do is usually sit, spend a few minutes connecting with the breath, really noticing the breath today, do a bit of like a brief body scan type thing where it's like, what am I feeling? Are there places I'm holding tension? Start to like relax my musculature, the physiology actually gets settled in a physical sense into the practice, and then start to kind of like explore what kind of lingering sensations are there that may be related to emotion or hesitation or resistance or like any of this type of stuff, and explore those a little bit. And I might ask myself, like, what do I need today? Um, and just see kind of what comes up. And sometimes that'll be like more body scan work. Sometimes that might be like a more formal body scan work. Sometimes that might be compassion practice. Maybe I need some self compassion. Maybe I'm noticing a lot of thoughts, like just sitting with myself. I'm noticing a lot of judgmental thoughts today. Like maybe it's about like just allowing my thoughts to be there and keep noticing them, and then coming back to the breath and trying to exercise some self-compassion. And sometimes it's like kind of Tara Brach. I don't know if you've looked into her, but she's got a great book called Radical Acceptance, and a great approach to things where it's just like being radically with myself in the moment and like, what's going on now, and so often that just brings up whatever judgments are going to be there, or hopes are going to be there, and really like just seeing like, okay, just sit with that, follow it, sit with the experience, of what it's like to have tension, sit with the experience of what it's like to have resistance. Don't push it away, like try to just be with radically and like whatever is there, and just notice all the different associations and nuances that come up, and then usually the half hour is like done by then, and then some.
I bet.
Yeah. And then sometimes informally, like I love to like, I'm a runner. I love to run. And I do long runs. And so sometimes like it's nice to do even part of that with my headphones off, not listening to anything and just watching my thoughts. And sometimes that movement really gets a whole new set of things coming up. And even just things like, I don't want to be doing this. Like, I'm exhausted. Why am I doing this? And it's like, am I really exhausted? Trying to find space, peace within those things. Sometimes it's on the yoga mat. Sometimes it's mindfulness on the public transit when I'm frustrated with the chaos and the noise, or that person who's like being mean or grumpy to the bus driver. And it's like, those are great opportunities to practice like actual compassion in real life, with the students meditating on their meditating, what I'm picking up, what I'm experiencing. Those like tethers and interconnectedness between people are great mindfulness opportunities. It's like sometimes I'm not aware of being mindful, and so many times it just comes up spontaneously through the day too.
That's absolutely fascinating. If anyone is lucky enough to be living in the Toronto area and wanted to get in touch with you, what would they do?
Yeah. So again, I do classes even for people not in the Toronto area. So anybody can get in touch with me at Joelle, Joelle, at kernelofwisdom.com. They can also go to my website, kernelofwisdom.com, or they can search Kernel of Wisdom on YouTube and kind of find me through all that stuff, or on Facebook. Try to put myself all over the place. So just kind of search Kernel of Wisdom. You'll find me or my site or my face probably somewhere on the internet. And we can get in touch and chat about mindfulness things, or even do lessons if that's what people really need.
Fantastic. I've found that absolutely fascinating, and I think I'm probably going to have to listen to that 2 or 3 times to sort of to get everything, truthfully, because there was a lot of stuff in there. So thank you ever so much, Joel. It's been really, really, really great. Thank you ever so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Gerard. It's awesome to be speaking with you. It's always awesome to talk to you and everybody at Everyday Mindfulness and all these different mindfulness communities out there. So thank you, thank you.